tomahawks and axes never really ends, and a big part of that is because the handle is roughly about the same length of a Filipino martial arts stick, allows a tomahawk or axe to lend itself the most easily to the FMA paradigm as it relates to motor control and handling. Although Filipino martial arts doesn't necessarily have tomahawks or axes within its curriculum, there are tomahawks and axes within its broad catalog of design, specifically the Igorot Headhunter axe. When I was at Blade Show 2025 recently, I was introduced to the owner of TRC Knives, which is based out of Lithuania. I was introduced to Andreas Tricius. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, my friend. They are known for producing high quality, handcrafted knives, specifically in their Tales of Men collection. One thing I did not know is that they are also the primary manufacturers for the highly respected Williams blade designs. In fact, I'm going to put this video here onto the side where they interview Andreas and they give you a little bit of a sneak peek into their shop and how they design their knives. But they also feature Chris Williams, and here you can see the famous Williams Blade Designs knives. The first time I picked up this wonderful Viking axe, I did have some biases towards it. First of all, from my experiences, any axe that tends to have this Viking beard tends to be a little bit on the heavy side. This is just a natural consequence because of the bearded design. When I first handled it, there was a bit of a disconnect because I expected it to handle much heavier, when in fact it was a little lighter in my hands. It was uncomfortably light. And when I say uncomfortably, in that it just did not match my expectations. So I started to move with it a little bit, and then I started to feel that, hey, this is not behaving the way I thought it would. In fact, it doesn't behave the way most tomahawks and axes do. So I was very compelled, and I say that in a very good way, in that it did not quite behave the way I wanted it to. So this is a very positive thing. Andreas was kind enough when we were speaking at his booth to offer that I review his prototype. So Andreas, thank you very much. And in the time that I've studied it and compared it to other tomahawks and axes in my collection, I will say that I am very impressed. But in addition to that, it opened up my understanding of my own paradigm as it relates to my own handling of tomahawks and axes. For this episode, I am going to be comparing the TRC Viking Axe prototype to two of the top tomahawks in the industry. One of them is the magnificent RMJ Shrike, and the other is the ever enigmatic Winkler RnD Tomahawk full-size version. Something I would like for you to note when we are looking at all three is their design origins. The Winkler RnD is inspired by the Igorot Headhunter design. A lot of that contribution did come from Tuhon Rafael Kayanan of the Sayoc Tactical Group. The design roots of the RMJ Shrike actually has its roots in the Lagana Vietnam era tomahawks, and I will say that if I'm not mistaken, that borrows heavily from Native American designs. The unique opportunity for the Estacado channel to review this TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype is the first one that has the Viking profile on it. So I'm going to be taking that into consideration when I move with it, but also provide it with this appropriate overview. Before I get into any of that, I do want to share with you the communication that I had with Andreas in my process of understanding his design better. So these are some of the questions that I sent over to him. I said, hey Andreas, a few questions as I draft the episode. What inspired you to make this Viking axe? Do you consider it an axe or a tomahawk? What are its primary and secondary purposes? What were some of your considerations when designing this particular axe? The handle, even the steel choice? What is the edge geometry? What have you tested the axe on? What kind of hard use is it capable of? And what are your top 3 pieces of advice for future owners of this particular tomahawk? He responded by saying, hey, thanks for your questions. Here are my answers. This is a fighting tomahawk designed primarily for tactical use. That said, it's also capable of chopping wood for fire prep, break through wooden doors, windows, metal barrels, car bodies, and car glass. So something to consider when it comes to his response. Although it is technically a double-duty axe, we have to consider his words in that this is primarily for tactical use. And the Viking axe, if I'm not mistaken, was designed primarily for tactical use as well. The primary purpose is combat and breaching. The secondary is survival and utility. The blade shape is curved for powerful smashing and chopping, so you can see that here. It's not a vertical top down. You see it has this, and then it angles off maybe at about a 15-degree curve, so it's straight on this side, 15-degree curve, so that allows it so that you have that angle for very powerful chopping. The blade shape is curved for powerful smashing and chopping. The handle is also curved to maximize impact force. We put a lot of focus on achieving perfect balance for efficient strikes. The steel is Sleipner, chosen for its excellent toughness and edge retention under hard use. I'm going to get to Sleipner in a little bit. Edge geometry is 37 inches total, tough enough for hard impacts, yet sharp enough for cutting tasks. We've tested it on firewood, demolishing wooden floors, windows, doors, drywall, metal drums, vehicle bodies, and glass. It handles serious abuse. And I like that he said serious abuse, because if you've ever listened to Andreas's interview, this is a very serious man. So for him to use that word serious, I take his word for it. And he says here, my top 3 tips for future use, right? In terms of care, maintenance, and for practice. Number 1, respect the blade. It's built for real use. So be very mindful when it comes to your practice. Something that I apply to myself, but also tell my own students and clients, is that if you're going to train with a live blade, it's better to do a lot of reps really slow so that you can get those reps in and really perfect your posture and your technique and your positioning, rather than doing something super really fast, maybe for about 10 or 15 minutes. Really good for that TikTok and doing it for the likes, but not really good for your motor control capability and your overall skill acquisition. Slower is better, so he is correct. Respect the blade. It's built for real use. Number 2, maintain the edge. A quick touch-up goes a long way. Practice your swings. It's all about control and balance. 100% correct. Now let's talk a little bit about what Sleipner steel is. Sleipner steel is an Udo-owned steel, I hope I pronounced that correctly, designed for cold work applications. It's known for its good wear resistance, toughness, and ability to achieve high hardness over 60 RHC, superbo, after tempering. It's often considered an upgrade to D2 steel, I love D2 steel, due to its improved toughness and wear resistance. Here's a more detailed breakdown. It has high wear resistance. Sleipner steel is designed to withstand abrasive wear, making it suitable for demanding cutting and forming applications. Like he said, although its primary purpose is for tactical use, it can do the double duty stuff. And like he mentioned, he was going through car bodies with this, which I'm not surprised that it can take serious abuse. Good toughness, it offers a good balance between hardness and toughness, reducing the risk of chipping or cracking. It can be hardened over 60 HRC, which I already said, providing excellent wear resistance while not fully stainless. It offers good corrosion resistance in typical conditions. It maintains its shape and size well during heat treatment and in service, good machinability, and good surface treatment. It can be found on bushcraft and outdoor knives. In summary, Sleipner steel is a versatile tool steel valued for its wear resistance, toughness, and ability to achieve high hardness. Now, this portion I got from TRC Knives, and I absolutely love some of these details. At TRC Knives, we handcraft tough and awe-inspiring multifunctional knives. This is very interesting because if you go to that interview that I shared, he talked about just focusing on quality, and he said sometimes they lose money because of the insistence on quality. He's not about profit. This is about really providing high quality and value to customers. And so when he says we handcraft tough and awe-inspiring multifunctional knives, that handcrafting is a big part of what drives that quality. And he says here, so that men can enjoy the rough pleasures of nature and undertake any challenge the outdoors may present them with. Our Tales of Men collection of knives was inspired by the great men of history who elevated the concept of manhood to a whole new level. Each knife tells a different story of manhood and honor. Therefore, every TRC knife is not just a badass multi-purpose knife, but also an empowering talisman. Check out the Tales of Men collection. I love this. Really, really love this. TRC Knives was founded in 2010 by Andreas Tricius, a knife devotee from Lithuania. Employing extensive knowledge of metallurgy, ergonomics, and design, Tritsius and his team experiment relentlessly to come up with hardcore, one-of-a-kind knife models. Only the highest quality materials are used at TRC Knives, such as the M390, LMAX, Venatus 4 Extra. The range of products includes knives for bushcraft, hunting tactical operations, apocalyptic survival, and everyday carry. Quote, after developing a new knife prototype, I take it to bed and sleep holding the knife in my hand. I wake up in the morning knowing exactly what needs to be changed to improve on the prototype. I want to say a few things about this because I think this is just phenomenal. Andreas is very much a man after my own heart. Number one, the idea that a knife is a talisman. This is very much a big thing in Estacada. This comes from the Filipino martial arts roots. A lot of Filipinos, especially on the edge weapons category, believe that their knives and swords have what's called in the Philippines anting-anting. They have these very powerful spiritual, otherworldly properties that primarily provide protection for its owner. So I love that he shares this same kind of mindset, that it is an empowering talisman. But the other thing that really stood out, and quite honestly, this is the first time I've heard it, he says that he takes a prototype, he holds it in his hand when he goes to bed, sleeps with it, and then from there he wakes up and he goes, oh, I guess I now know what needs to be done to improve and perfect the design. There are so many things I can say, going to narrow it down to just a few, and I include myself in this list. If you are a serious edged weapons aficionado, at one point in your life, you took one of those knives, one of those swords, one of those axes, and you either had it at your bedside or you did sleep with it in your hand. There is something about that process where the energetic properties and the physical properties of a particular tool somehow, in my opinion, kind of permeates your subconscious and, in my opinion, even your soul and spirit, so that when you take one of these tools that have the correct physical and spiritual properties, so that once you hold it, not only do you have a greater understanding of the tool itself has a greater bonding with you. So for those of you who've been following my channel for a while and seen me move with certain tools, you can tell which ones are in my hand when I went to bed and which ones actually stayed outside in the living room. This is a very important detail in how Andreas works. He puts a spiritual and almost subconscious primordial aspect of himself into the design and into the Viking Axe prototype, so that by the time you receive it, you feel that there's something very unique about it. That's how I felt when I first held this, when I met him at Blade Show 2025 at his booth. Compared to the TRC Tomahawk, the RnD actually likes to angle forward, and also this is a full tang design. And I think this is the most standout aspect of the RnD. This spike that's in front, which actually creates a type of catching effect like the Filipino sungkit, where when you drive it into a portion of the anatomy, it actually captures the entire anatomy. It handles very much like a kukri in that it wants to fall forward. It has this kind of rounded shape so that it can fit under the neck. If you're trying to get an opponent into extension, which is a very weak anatomical position for anybody, is that if you put them in extension, you pull out your sidearm and you go and do your business, this portion fits correctly underneath the neck. These are some of the important design advantages of the Winkler RnD. Because it is full tang, it tends to sit very comfortably and snugly in the hand, where you can actually feel the weight of it, the mass of it, radiate up to your shoulder. If you're doing this correctly, you can feel your shoulder girdle settle into your lats, so that when you're carrying it and use the multi-sectional handle to its full capacity, you can even use it in this capacity where it acts more like a karambit. By comparison, when you take a look at the TRC Viking Axe, some things stand out in comparison. The first one, when I first handle it, is that it is relatively lighter compared to the Winkler RnD. A big part of that is that although there is some curving in the handle, it is relatively straight compared to the RnD. The RnD likes to curve forward, where this tends to be straighter. Right now, when you're taking a look at it, it says, well, it looks pretty straight to me. Nope, because the handle ergonomics, when you hold it, it actually tips forward because of the handle ergonomics. Because you don't have the multi-sectioning here in the handle, once you handle it straight, it handles straight. All of the mass of it sits very comfortably in the hand and has kind of a floaty feeling to it, which I really like. Some of the best swords I've handled have that kind of floaty feel to it. The other thing that stands out is the fact that this bearded axe here is very much in line with a lot of historical Viking axes in that there isn't necessarily this ability to catch, just like what you saw in the Winkler RnD with that front spike, which is inspired by the Filipino sungkit, but the catching and hooking comes from this part of the Viking axe. The hooking capabilities of the Viking axe is one of the things that makes the Viking axe such a compelling weapon. Part of what made the Viking Hordes really effective in warfare. Intuitively, one can think, hey, this hooking piece over here, I can go ahead and hook his weapon, I can hook his limb, but from what I understand, a lot of that hooking was used on shields. So if somebody has a shield up and someone takes a Viking axe, hooks the shield, takes it over, hey, peekaboo, and a Viking sword or a spear, that's a big part of the role of the Viking beard portion of an axe. One thing I like about it is that normally this adds a lot of weight. I have seen a lot of Viking axes where the beard is really exaggerated. Here there's a lot of finessing to it. And why is that important? Because if you have a Viking axe that has a very exaggerated beard, what it tends to do is that when you tip it way past 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, it puts a lot of stress on the wrist. So now you're being put in these kinds of angles that generally, as you can see here, not really advantageous if you are working with a tomahawk. When you have a Viking beard, especially if there's a spike, that extra weight, when you're going into angle number 4 and you're right about here, it tends to fall forward. It tends to fall past that angle 4. And look what happens here. This is not good. I'm not comfortable here, especially if I'm doing some close quarter work and I just happen to have that spike. Oh my God, just nick my tricep. Not very good. Not a good trip to the ER. One thing that stood out, and I mentioned this to Andreas, and Tomas was there when I was having this conversation, is that oddly, when I do this, it lands right at 4 o'clock. This stood out to me because I said, hey, most tomahawks, especially if I hold it at the bottom end, it will go past 4 o'clock. There's no strain on the wrist when I hold the TRC Viking Axe. A little different, as you can see, with the Winkler RnD. There's just enough strain here so that it just goes past at angle number 4. But that's purposeful because of the design of the head, and it just happens to be Sayoc tactical. Once it goes past angle number 4, I can switch into this karambit grip, this type of sungkit effect to it, and it has this impacting also. So you have this impact, sungkit, catch the guy down. That's why if I do this, goes past angle number 4, I catch, sungkit, impact. But that's specific to the paradigm of the Winkler RnD, which is Filipino-based. I don't want that if it is not a Filipino-based tomahawk or axe. This is a Viking axe. I don't want it going past that angle number 4. So when it goes to this angle number 4, it lands so lightly, so easily, that once I'm here, I can go across really nicely with that power assist. But also, if I need to flip it across and spike up this way, so if I'm here, I go to the ribs, I go here, I go to the temple, and it's so super light and nimble. I absolutely loved it the minute I held it. Couldn't stop asking him questions at the booth, and I also couldn't stop praising him for the work that he had done. So really, really good job on this part, Andreas. By comparison, if we take a look at the RMJ Shrike, which in my opinion is an absolute gold standard when it comes to tomahawks, it's really hard to beat an RMJ Shrike. The fact that it is just so accessible, the fact that it is so elegant, the straightness of the handle ensures that there's a lot of accessibility to it. The balance points are really there, so that whether I'm in that angle number 3 or in that angle number 4, I go into that 1 or 2, reverse the spike. So much going on with this, but the best part is that you don't necessarily need to have intermediate or even advanced skills to make this an absolutely accessible tool for you. So the RMJ Shrike, in my opinion, is actually one of the gold standards when it comes to the use of the tomahawk in the tactical space. In fact, RMJ himself has said that he's not a big fan of a lot of tomahawk paradigms in the tactical space because from the feedback that he has gotten from US personnel, they don't necessarily need the tactical paradigms because if you have a superior tool, what more kind of damage do you need in order to make use of a very effectively designed weapon of war? So when we do a side-by-side comparison to it, the first thing that should stand out to you is the fact that the head of the TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype is massive compared to the RMJ Shrike. I mean, just take a look at that. Take a look at just how it dwarfs the Shrike in terms of the head. In addition to it, this straight handle compared to the curved handle, there's a little more ergonomic feedback as a result of this. Something else that I want to point out here is that you have this glass breaker here on the RMJ Shrike. You can actually unscrew this and you can put things inside the handle a la John Rambo. Those are the additional features of the RMJ Shrike. Even though this has the bigger head and this one has the smaller head, this one actually feels lighter. It's very close between the two of them, but this one actually feels a lot lighter. Both are very lively. Both actually feed into that type of clock paradigm that I use and actually borrowed from De Cuerdas, where I want this to be effective at any angle along an imaginary clock. So this is 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, any angle or chopping along this line, along the 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 3 o'clock reference indices. One of the distinct features of the TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype is this slight angle to it compared to the RMJ Shrike. The RMJ Shrike is straight up and down, so this will behave a lot more like an FMA stick. That's a big part of its features because if I'm going to strike forward with the head of the axe, reverse it and go into the spike of the axe, this is something that is so neutral in terms of its movement. When I strike with the head or strike with the spike, it feels absolutely the same. One important advantage of this is that it is curved forward, so what this does is that it actually lends to any sort of forward chopping and slashing, and there's an immediate fail-safe in case I need to go in the opposite way, because if I go in the opposite way, I can easily land on my own deltoid and bicep, but because of that front curve, there's an auto-correcting mechanism so that I can go really fast, go fire, and go this way. It won't even come close. This is an important feature of it because a lot of times when you have that kind of sharpened spike and you have a straight handle, some tomahawks, one of which I own, will actually touch my delt or my bicep. This is not the case with the RMJ Shrike, but I think a lot of that has to do with the correct dimensions of the head relative to the handle, meaning this is small and tight enough, the mass is reduced enough so that when I go here, it doesn't keep going because of its mass. A lot of that mass is evenly proportioned from head all the way to the bottom of the handle. What Andreas did is instead of distributing that mass a certain way, he curved it. So when he curved this handle here, when I go this way, that curve actually prevents it touching my arm even further. So this is a very good auto-correcting mechanism in case I get a little too rambunctious with my swinging of the tomahawk. Another couple of features that I do want to point out here, this part of the beard is not sharpened, which I really like because if I'm going to two-hand it, I need to be able to come all the way up to the head of the handle. So if I'm in very serious close quarter business and I have to use a lot of power, especially along the bilateral aspect of my anatomy, I can choke up on the Viking Axe, put my left hand on it, and I can implement this push-pull mechanism so that if I'm in close quarters, I can push, chop, slash across, or if I need to, turn it around and use this as a spike. I can do that with the RMJ Shrike, but with a little bit of extra caution. This part here is actually sharpened. However, I can actually come all the way up here, and there's a part of the tomahawk that's actually not sharp, but not too far from that is something so sharp that I'm a little nervous every time I do this in practice, where I go, ah! It's just it's a little too close to the hand. It is doable, it is. It just makes me a little nervous when I do it. But that said, this is doable also, but I don't recommend it because you don't want to make any mistakes, especially if you just take your fingers out just a little too forward, you're just a little too aggressive with it. So as much as I like that they made room for it so that I can do it, I'm not too comfortable with the fact that it's just a little too close to where that notch is. This is something I don't have to worry about with this particular prototype because this is not sharpened. Lastly, if we go ahead and take a look at the spike, this portion of the spike is actually not sharpened. So the only thing that's sharpened about this particular spike is actually the tip. It is ground in such a way so it kind of comes into this triangular needle point, so I can imagine what its puncture capabilities are when I go ahead and reverse it and puncture it this way. Overall, I'm very pleasantly surprised by how the TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype handles in my hand, because it handles like a much lighter tomahawk, and it's something that it has no business doing. So what I'm going to do right now is show you some comparison in terms of its movement capabilities in comparison to the RMJ Shrike and the paradigm I attach to that, as well as the Winkler RnD, so that we can appreciate the work that Andreas has put into this magnificent TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for letting me share. The best way for me to illustrate the full handling and movement capabilities of the TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype is to do a head-to-head comparison with the Sayoc Winkler RnD Full-Size at first, and then the RMJ Full-Size Shrike. So here it is, direct comparison with the RnD, and you can see how the Viking Axe is just so much bigger than the RnD. But a lot of what dictates the movement capabilities of the RnD is that full tang design. You see how it goes past that parallel on the horizontal line, but even as I go down on the sagittal plane, you see how it just likes to fall forward. But I do believe that this is purposeful, because when I go into this X pattern and I go ahead and close the distance, it really hands off well to the left hand and starts to work as a karambit. It closes the gap between long range and short range by switching to the left. Now let's take a look at the Viking Axe prototype, and as you can see, it does not like to go past that horizontal line. So let's take a look at a couple of options. First and foremost, when we are in long range going to X pattern, one of the options is to actually use that bearded portion of the axe to catch a certain portion of the anatomy to go ahead and close the distance. But in this instance, I don't like to close the distance with just one hand. I'm going to use two hands for this one. So I'm going to two-hand it when I'm going from long range and into short range. I two-hand it and then I reverse it into the spike. So that's one of the options that I have, so that when I turn it, I have the spike, so it's a true finisher, not necessarily an anatomy capture. The other option that I have is to borrow a method from the De Cuerda system called the wiper. The wiper is a type of abbreviated redondo where after I close the distance, I turn my right shoulder and use the spike to hit the temple. This is something that I really favor. So once I go into this long distance range using X patterns, it allows me to then turn the right shoulder after an angle number one. I take advantage of the momentum that I build. So after I go ahead and use that angle number one, turn my right shoulder, use that spike to go into the head, the temple, or the neck. From this sequence, I can then move on to an improvised multiple opponent template. Turning that right shoulder allows me to do that. So again, long range, short range, and using the wiper. Now let's move on to the RMJ. The RMJ has very similar capabilities in that it does not like to move past that horizontal line. I can do an anatomy capture with the beard. Especially with that sharpened beard, I can do a lot of damage, and I can also move into this wiper segment. Once I go into this wiper combination from long range to short range, I could be tempted to go into two-handing it, but remember, it is sharpened. So if I go ahead and do this exact same combination with that wiper and go to two-handed, really not a good idea. Now let's go back to the TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype and use the exact same combination where I two-hand it. If this is part of your template, then yes, it is safe for you to do because the beard is not sharpened. From here, I can do a lot of things. I have a lot of options here, but that's one of the key advantages of the Viking Axe prototype, in that it gives you the opportunity to do a lot of two-handed combinations while maintaining some anatomy capture, specifically with that bearded portion of the axe. So remember, from here, I can go ahead and also use that spike after that capture. Let's take a look at this again. Long range, two-handed, capture, and then spike. You see how a lot of the options here are readily available to you with the Viking Axe prototype, and I think this is a big part of what makes it such a really well thought out design. This is a really great job done by Andreas. Now let's take a look at more of its movement capabilities. I can go ahead and do some anatomy captures and some spikes, and then go into this wiper. The spike in the back of this Viking Axe is very unique because a lot of historical Viking axes don't necessarily have a spike that is as emphasized as this one. So when you have a Viking axe, you're really taking a look at anatomy capture so that you can use the bearded axe portion of it. But if you happen to miss some of those opportunities, the beauty of it is that you have that spike, so that when you miss any of these angles, you can reverse it into that spike. I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of speed in this template that I put together for the TRC Knives Viking Axe prototype, and then from here I'm gonna go ahead and free flow with it. Overall, I would say that the design is a huge success because it was able to maintain the liveliness of the RMJ Full-Size Shrike. The Full-Size Shrike is, in my opinion, the liveliest tomahawk I've ever handled. In addition to that, this prototype was able to add the same level of versatility in terms of offensive options as the Sayoc Winkler RnD. It focuses a little bit more on the two-handed option because of its bearded capabilities and bearded design. I can't wait for this to go into mass production because I think it's going to be a very successful design once it launches. Congratulations, Andreas and TRC Knives, for this magnificent design. So stick around, stay tuned, more videos to come.